Welcome, everyone, to this evening's program. I'm Sue Siglowski. I'm the Executive Director for the VSBA. And I'm getting a join breakout room notice. And we are very excited about our program tonight. We're really glad you could join us. I'd like to thank our panelists for this evening's program on PCBs in schools. In order of appearance, they are Representative Peter Conlon, who is the chair of the House Education Committee, Patricia Coppolino, who is the Senior Environmental Program Manager for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, Elaine Collins, who is the Superintendent of the North Country Supervisory Union, Lauren Fearman, Superintendent for the Two Rivers Supervisory Union. Then we have Jill Briggs Campbell from the Agency of Education, the Federal Emergency Funds Program Manager. And I don't think that describes everything she does. She certainly does a lot there. And last but not least, we have Vermont's Attorney General, Charity Clark. So let's get started first with House Education Chair Peter Conlon, who is going to provide a review of the legislative action that put this PCB testing program in place and brought us to where we are today. Chair Conlon, would you please take us back maybe to 2021 when the legislature developed this testing program, and then kind of bring us forward to where we are today from the legislature's perspective?
I will. Greetings, everybody. Hello to my former ACSD colleagues and to those of you who are frequent visitors to the State House. It's nice to see everyone. So Peter Conlon, I'm the chair of the House Education Committee, and I will take us back to the waning days of the legislative session of 2021 to talk about the beginning of this program. And let me just say at the outset, I'm not a very objective person when it comes to this. The House Education Committee has had a very strong perspective on this program, as has the House in general, which differs from the current reality that we are in today. So I'm happy to put that out there at the beginning. So the testing program, the PCB testing program, and it really was a testing program at the start, was something that was, frankly, was inserted into the budget bill in the waning days of the 2021 legislative session in May, very close to adjournment. We were a Zoom legislature at that point. We weren't in person. So it was a difficult one for the House. It was essentially inserted into the budget by the Senate. And it was the pet project of a couple of key senators who were also working at the urging of the Department of Health, who advocated for this testing program after seeing the results from Burlington High School. So there was a very, frankly, small amount of language, but with pretty big impact in the 2021 budget that said they created the testing program and allotted a couple of $1 million, maybe between $2 and $3 million for it to happen, saying that all schools in the state must test for PCB levels, and essentially left what those levels should be and how the testing should be carried out to the agency or the Department of Health and the Agency of Natural Resources. It never really got a hearing in the House. Again, it was the waning days. It wasn't its own standalone bill. So it didn't really get much of a debate or testimony in the House Education Committee. And just by comparison, a couple of years before, the lead testing bill passed and was created. And that was the subject of weeks of testimony, lots of negotiation, lots of sort of figuring out how it was going to work, how it was going to be funded. And really, the cost of that program is going to probably be a rounding error compared to the cost of the testing and remediation program for PCBs. So anyway, it passed, it was created. The Department of Environmental Conservation started working out their testing protocols. The Department of Health came up with the various thresholds that maybe many of you have learned about. They're the lowest in the nation thresholds for action that must be taken. And the program begun. Fast forward 1 year to the 2022 legislative session. The House again saw that this testing program probably needed more time, tried to extend the deadline by which all the testing needed to be done by 2 years. That was opposed by our colleagues in the Senate. Compromise prevailed, and we extended it for a year, a deadline for all the testing to be done. And we also set aside $30 million in education fund surplus to take care of remediation. You know, once the thresholds are sort of triggered in what the Department of Health came up with, it has to be dealt with. And, I think that many of us believe that this was turning into, frankly, the mother of all unfunded mandates. So $30 million was set aside to address this. And that currently basically sits unspent. $16 million is currently allocated to help pay for the demolition and removal of the Burlington High School and their PCB contaminated building. So now we're going to fast forward again to 2023. And I'm speaking from the perspective of the House Education Committee a bit. We started taking testimony early in the session. Since testing was starting, results were coming in. This included the Department of Environmental Conservation reporting that the testing alone was probably going to need twice the budgeted money and twice the allotted time to complete. And meanwhile, to us, it was becoming increasingly clear that the testing and Vermont's low action thresholds were creating and were going to create a lot of stress on a system that was, frankly, already under a lot of stress from a lot of other areas, mainly coming out of COVID and all of the challenges that it presented. And we also could see that because of the way this program was designed, it was really interrupting and causing great problems to what we consider to be a much bigger problem that needs to be addressed. And that's our long-term facilities needs in our schools in Vermont. Basically this testing program, as it goes on, if it finds problems in your schools, it needs to be dealt with immediately, regardless of what you might have planned for the future, 5 years down the road. And so it just seemed like long-term construction needs, the PCB testing and remediation program, they didn't play well together from a logistical point of view. So we passed a bill, H486, that essentially said, let's pause this testing program. Let's let this newly created task force looking at funding and creating a school construction program, deal with it, take a much more in-depth look at what its implications are, how it's working vis-a-vis construction in the future, get some more feedback from those in the field who are having been dealing with it, and put it on hold for a bit. That was a popular discussion in the House Education Committee. We passed a bill, 11-1. It then passed on a voice vote, strong margin in the House, but faced strong opposition in the Senate. And really, we knew that would happen, but what we were also surprised at is it also faced very strong opposition from the Scott administration. Folks from Agency of Education, Agency of Natural Resources, and the Department of Health all testified very strongly in opposition of pausing this program. So the program continues, and this construction task force has been given the job of looking at it, coming up with recommendations of how it can sort of be better coordinated with the long-term facilities needs in our state. Nobody had to this date, and a lot of people have been thinking about how can we make these two work well together, has come up with a way to do it, because one is going on right now and needs to be addressed immediately when results are found, and the other is a much longer term look at what our needs are in the future. Anyway, the Senate ended up taking no action on our bill. The House also passed the bill very late in the session, asking that the Scott administration, given their very strong support for the testing and remediation program, and we really turned it into a testing and remediation program by saying, the state has mandated this, the state's going to pay for the remediation. But given their strong support for it, we asked them to provide for a report on how it was going to be paid for, including how to pay for remediation at private schools without that money coming out of the education fund. The Senate it was so late in the session, did not get a chance to take up this bill. And we really haven't heard from the administration any sort of plan going forward on how this is going to be paid for. Now, one of the problems that we have is that nobody knows how much this is going to cost. Tonight we'll hear from Jill Briggs Campbell from AOE and Patricia Coppolino from the Department of Environmental Conservation. And, they're stuck carrying out this policy. And I feel bad for them. I pretty much watch every public forum on this issue at every school where it happens. And, they haven't been given guidance to sort of give people confidence that there's a plan in place to deal with this. And, I think as we move forward into the next legislative session, we can talk more about this at the end, we're really going to be looking for guidance from the administration, given their strong support of it and their opposition to pausing it, as to how we're going to pay for this and how we're going to move it forward in coordination with our construction program. I'll leave it there. Thanks for the time, and I'm happy to answer questions when we get to the end.
Thank you very much, Chair Conlon. We'll definitely come back to you at the end. Now we're going to move to Trish Coppolino from the Department of Environmental Conservation. Trish is going to talk about the schools that have been tested so far and what's been found. We thank you very much for being here, Trish. And to start with, I'm thinking there probably are some people that don't have the basic information about what a PCB is or what PCBs are. So if you could give us a little bit of information about that, and also talk about the schools that have been tested so far, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. So I guess I hadn't planned on talking about all the schools that have been sampled, but I can try and weave that into what I did put together for everybody. So I did put together at least an overview of the program so that people understand exactly how it operates and what we're doing and some of the rationales behind it, and then some of the general findings that we have been finding in the schools in the state. So I'm Trish Coppolino. I'm the Senior Program Manager in the Department of Environmental Conservation. The PCB program that's been enacted through legislation has been directed to Department of Environmental Conservation to regulate and operate, but I operate with two partners, Agency of Education, which is Jill, and then the Department of Health, which is Dr. Owen. And the three agencies have been working together jointly on this effort since the legislation started, to put together a program that hopefully works for the schools, their community, and the state agencies to actually be able to implement. So PCBs generally are polychlorinated biphenyls. They were man-made chemicals that were used in multiple uses. But we're looking at them in schools because they were added to building materials. Specifically within some of the schools, they're added to materials that construction wanted to have plasticity kept in them. So we think about paints, caulkings, mastics, tile adhesives, jointing materials for buildings and roof decking. But we're also seeing it in spray-on fireproof materials as well. PCBs were banned by the Environmental Protection Agency in 1979 for multiple reasons, mostly because they don't break down quickly in the environment. They are bioaccumulative, and they have some large health effects for humans. Generally speaking, both cancer and non-cancer health effects. Monsanto was the only producer of PCBs in the United States, and I'm happy to see our AAGs are here to talk to you about what's going on with Monsanto, so I don't have to. And so I'll leave that piece alone until later. But because of some elevated levels of PCBs in indoor air in Burlington High School, There was legislation that was put in place that required all schools that were built before 1980 to be tested for indoor air contamination of PCBs. So the program that was put together looked at all of the schools in Vermont that were built or renovated before 1980. We went through every school and we categorized them based on potential for PCBs to be in their school based on age of construction. And then we also looked at reduced and free lunch percentages within the schools, and we ranked them for a priority so that we could start looking at the best way to sample them. We were given different timeframes to implement all this work. I'm happy that we at least have an extension now from the latest legislation that gives us until 2027 to do all of this work, but the original process that we looked at, I believe, went to 2024 for us to have all the work done. And so I have schools categorized for that amount of sampling per quarter, and that's available on our website. If you don't know when your school is going to be sampled, you can check there, but we are hoping to revise that and extend some of the sampling out to give all of us a little bit of breathing room. My staff are working really hard, as well as all the consultants in the state, and I know where there are some schools where we have multiple impacts in one district. It's a lot of work for you as well, so we're looking at ways to try and extend our sampling out a little. So part of the process, once we selected the schools, we have hired consultants to do the first round of work that needs to happen, which is an inventory and indoor air sampling. And so the legislature gave the Department of Environmental Conservation $4.85 million to conduct indoor air sampling. And so the consultants will contact the school. They will go to the school and they will conduct a full building inventory where they go through every space in the school and look for building materials that could potentially contain PCBs in them. And some of them I listed, so you have an idea of what they are. And then once they go through and do that inventory, they take all of the different spaces and they put them into groups for us. And what we do is we make an assumption that groups that are of similar construction, similar type of HVAC and cooling systems, similar construction, renovation timeframes, et cetera, get put into the same groups. And then we basically ask the consultants to sample 30% of the spaces within each of those groups. And so if there's 10 spaces in a group, they'll collect 3 indoor air samples for us. We basically take this data and from the sampled spaces and we extend it into the unsampled spaces so we can have something that looks representative for each space. The Department of Health does a lot of work to come up with occupancy options based on the data we collect and the grouping system that was put together. And they provide the school with occupancy option letters. And some of you have probably received these from us. They are very detailed and can be confusing. And so we certainly try to make sure we have a meeting with all of the superintendents and principals to walk through what that data says, make sure that the schools understand what we're asking them to do with that data and how those decisions can impact their outcomes. Sometimes it's all worked out in one meeting, and sometimes we have 3 meetings with the school. It really depends on what the school's needs are and what the information is that we're sharing. We do ask the schools to provide a community letter before the sampling starts so that the community knows that indoor air sampling is going to start in the school, and we have those templates on our website. And after we meet with the school and ask them to select an occupancy option, we provide 10 days for the school to select that option before the data goes live on our database. And we also ask the schools to send another letter out to their community explaining what the results were and what the next steps are. After that, we offer to have a public meeting. And I just came from one for Dover Elementary School where we share what we're doing in the program. We provide information related to PCBs like I'm doing here, and we answer questions that the community has to help alleviate any concerns they have, or make sure that we're not asking the schools to answer questions that they're not in a position to be answering. we try to provide as much support as we can for the schools, knowing that this really is not a great outcome for them, but it's also something that, at least from what I've heard, some of the teachers are happy that it's happening and their spaces are being addressed. So the next steps that come from this, and this is where Jill's money comes in. So we find impacts to the indoor air. What we do is we look at what we call school action levels, and those are concentrations that are derived by the Department of Health. And there's 3 different values that we use based on the age of the population in the school. They range from 30 nanograms per meter cubed for pre-K, 60 for K through 6, and then 100 for 7th through adult. And if you exceed one of those school action levels, then there's next steps that need to happen. So the next steps are looking to potentially reduce indoor air concentrations in the spaces where PCBs were detected. And some ways that we do that are use of carbon filters, increasing outdoor air, changing HVAC operations. With any of those, we like to do quarterly sampling in between to make sure that those actions are working. And if they're not, we look to make a change back or resample again to make sure that the data we received is accurate. So I'm starting right now. Anything moving forward is funding that the Agency of Education has to help with all of this work. And so I'll let Jill talk about access to that and how it works. But just so you know, we've moved off of the money that DEC has now and into the money that AOE has. And so the next piece is for the school to hire a consultant. We have a list of consultants. There are some others that aren't on that list, and you can talk to Jill about how to access them. I know the current group of consultants we have is very busy with a lot of the work that we have for them, plus other work in the state. This is kind of where the regulatory process starts for most of you. The consultant that you hire needs to put together a work plan for us to review and approve. That work plan is basically to sample the different building materials that are suspected of containing PCBs. At some point in time, if concentrations are high enough, it's 50 parts per million is the magic number. The US EPA may also get involved as a regulatory authority. This can be an iterative process, or it can lead us right into getting to some type of cleanup plan. So we have, at some schools, implemented an emergency corrective action plan. We are able to identify the source, at least the major source of PCBs at one school. In this case, it was a window with some glazing on it, multiple windows with glazing on it. And we were able to implement an emergency corrective action plan for the windows to be removed. I think there is a mix of funding that's going into that, both from Agency of Education's PCB money and maybe some other money that Jill keeps in her bank account. But we were able to make that happen. So that was exciting. And then resampling is awaiting. We also have several documents that we call environmental corrective action alternative documents. And for those, we basically have a good understanding, what I like to call degree and extent of contamination. So we know where it is, we know how much it is, and now we're ready to take action on it. And that document really looks at all the different alternatives that exist to address that contamination. So I don't know, I'm guessing a lot of you know about Cabot Elementary School, so I'll just pretend that, well, I'll talk about Cabot. So in Cabot Elementary School, there's paint on the ceiling that has really high concentrations of PCBs in it. And the consultant initially wanted to sandblast it and take the paint off and then hope that that would work. And so that action wasn't the best action, because I started asking the consultant a lot of questions. So after you sandblast the paint off of the wood, what are you going to do? You have to basically clean all of the dust out of every single pore in that space. And what if the sandblasting doesn't work and the wood is still contaminated? And so in this action, I asked the consultant to look at 3 options for mitigation here, to look at what those alternatives are And in this alternatives analysis, it goes through cost, time, efficiency, effectiveness. And then there is an option for the school to look at to weigh which one works best for the school, both time-wise, effective-wise, and whether or not they want to have long-term O&M actions at the school if they leave PCBs in place. And so for this document, we call it an ECA. That's our acronym for it. We have several of these that are being drafted or will start to be drafted for some schools. So that's great. We'll get to that point. But this also allows for schools to think about that planning option that Rep. Conlon was talking about, because now they can start to think about which option works best for their long-term plans and how can they build long-term construction plans or renovations into the cleanup that might need to happen. So after the alternatives analysis document is complete, an action and alternative is selected, the next thing is a corrective action plan. And that documents exactly what will be done to clean up the school, how much it will cost, what the time frame is, and more of the engineered drawings and specifics related to that cleanup. That document, assuming there's concentrations that are greater than 50, will also need to be approved by the Environmental Protection Agency, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So knowing that there's 2 regulatory agencies that need to approve this document, DEC has been working very closely with the OCPA. We meet weekly. We talk about all the projects, what's being planned, what's being found, and how we're moving things forward, and also when documents might show up on EPA's desk for review and approval. We've also drafted an MOU to put together between the 2 agencies so that we can have some streamlined actions moving forward. I am just waiting for it to be finalized on EPA's side so I can put it through on our side to finalize it. Let me just look at my notes. All right. The only other thing that exists between the ECA and the CAP is what we call interim actions. And so interim actions are really ways that we mitigate PCBs until we are ready to take an action. And so an example of an interim action that we've been looking at a school is it's a gym space where there's large concentrations, high concentrations of PCBs in jointing in their gym wall. And we're not in a position right now to be able to take that jointing out or replace the gym wall or do a lot of additional work there. But what we can do is put some metal tape over that jointing to stop the volatilization of the PCBs from that material, so that we can take a little time to understand the best approach to mitigating that jointing. So EPA allows for interim actions. There's 5 years that you're allowed to have this interim action in place. There's monitoring that needs to happen to show that it's effective, but it is something that kind of gives you, the schools and school boards, more time for planning to work on a larger approach to potentially a larger building cleanup that happens over summer timeframe when we're ready to do that. So I wrote this in my notes, and I'm guessing that you might know this by now, but this isn't a quick process or an easy process. We are certainly here, me and all of my staff, to help you and your community with what the findings are, what the next steps are, provide any guidance, suggestions that you need to help make decisions. I don't expect any of you to be PCB experts, and so we are here for as many calls, emails, Teams meetings, Zoom meetings, or community meetings that you feel you need to try and understand how to make your path forward. I am hearing from principals that this is time consuming and stressful, and I'm sorry about that. But anything that we can do to try and help you, please let me know. I don't want you to be stressed out with what's happening here. So with the time piece, I just wanted to point out that there are a lot of factors that are outside the control of the state agencies. The timeliness of consultants is hard for us. I mean, we're constantly trying to push them. When you become their client, you can push them. They work for you. and make sure they understand what your timeframes are. My staff have been great at turning documents around within 5 days or less. And so I just want to make sure that you feel empowered to make sure your consultant understands what you need from them so that you can get that. And then lab turnaround times have been the biggest crunch for us. There are only 4 labs in the country that do indoor air sampling, which doesn't help a lot in what we're doing. And so we've had results taking between 6 to 8 weeks to get back to us. There certainly are ways to rush the results if we're looking for immediate results back to show that something we're doing is effective, to make our staff, students, and community feel better about what their spaces look like. So that's an option. It's just costs a little more. Just looking at my notes. So the last thing I have, and I think this maybe is what Sue wanted me to talk about, but I'm sorry, I talked about a lot of other things. So, some of the outcomes that we're finding in the schools right now, so common sources that we are seeing now, that when we walk into a school, it's almost easy for us to say, I bet that has PCBs in it, is spray-on fireproofing. That seems to have really high concentrations of PCBs in it. It was the highest source of PCBs at Burlington High School, and seems to be the highest source of PCBs at another school that we're working on that has the same material there. Window caulking has been a consistent one for us at all the schools. The glass block windows, it's really the glazing that's between the glass blocks that we've seen really high concentrations at. Really high concentrations in paint. I'm talking about the original paint that was applied at the school. And for an example, the Cabot school I brought up, they paint on their gym ceiling was the original paint to the school. That was over 500 parts per million of PCBs. And then jointing is another one that we're seeing where there are really high concentrations of PCBs as well. The biggest impacts I think that we're seeing to schools where you have a pre-K in there is the pre-K space, because it is the lowest school action level that we have. So it's hard to, where you might have all your other spaces are fine. The pre-K space is usually the one that is right over the 30 nanogram per cubic meter. For some reason, we're having a lot of impacts to our larger spaces, like our gyms and our libraries, and I haven't figured out the source of that yet, but that's also harder for us to mitigate as well because they're so large. Putting an air filter in there hasn't really been an effective option for us, and so we've been trying to take care of all of the other classroom spaces, look for alternate spaces for PE if we can, and then look at how we can hopefully manipulate an HVAC system to try and help with the larger spaces. But that one seems to be more of a struggle for us right now. The largest issue that we're hearing from schools that have air filters is the noise. They're not quiet, but they are effective. And so trying to make sure that they stay on or look for ways to have them on high when teachers aren't there, and low maybe when they are there, but trying to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to keep the air circulating and having good air exchange in those spaces. So to date, we have looked at 98 schools where we've moved forward with conducting indoor air sampling or approved indoor air sampling. We've approved up to 144 inventories to start. And when I say approved, it means a purchase order has come to me and I've approved it. And so we've told the consultant, yes, you can move forward. And so we're in the process, if it hasn't happened yet, of contacting the school to start the inventory. And then between the inventory and the sampling, you can see there's a little bit of a lag, but we've approved 98 schools for indoor air sampling. Of those, 47 of them have not had an exceedance of a school action level. So that's 66% of the schools that we've sampled so far, which is good. And then the number of schools that have an IAL exceedance, so that's the one where we say you can't use that space, is 12 schools, 17% of all of the schools that we sampled. And then there's 24 schools that have exceeded a SAL, and that's 34% of the total. And so those schools are in the process that I mentioned, either the emergency corrective action plan, the ECA, or the sampling process to look at building materials. I think that was all I wanted to share with you. And I'm happy to answer questions later or now, whatever works for everybody.
Thank you very much, Trish. That was a lot of information you gave, and it's really valuable information for all of us to have. I'm wondering if anyone in the audience has any questions you'd like to ask Trish now. You'll have an opportunity at the end as well. Oh, I see Edie Granning has her hand up. Go ahead, Edie.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick question. I have lots and lots of questions. I wrote them down, but just for today, you've said you've been sampling the schools that are the oldest.
So we look, yeah. So we broke the schools up into age groups, and we basically said schools from 1950 to 1980 were the ones that had the highest likelihood to have PCBs in them. That was the heyday of PCB production. And then we broke them up into different age groups after that, with like the 1800 schools being the ones that had the least likelihood to have PCBs in them. And so we started with that piece of it first.
So started with the group that you assume have the most likelihood, or that have Correct. The most likelihood. Okay. Just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for Trish at this time? I'm not seeing any other hands. Trish, you mentioned the role that Jill Briggs Campbell plays in all of this. So I think it makes sense to move on to Jill at this point, if you're able to speak with everyone, Jill.
Sure. My bit's sort of short in this. I like that Trish says I have a bank account with all this money. I would be buying ice creams if that was my my choice. So the AOE sort of has two tasks in this program. One is very straightforward and is laid out in statute, and that is that the dollars that are being used to pay for PCB costs go through the Agency of Education. However, also in statute, DEC approves those costs. So AOE really is functioning like a bank here, as opposed to some of our other programs where we're like really reviewing, and you know, the grant programs that most of you are probably familiar with, your school's receiving. So as Trish says, as soon as you receive that letter from DEC that says you have an exceedance of PCBs, those costs from then on are being covered by the state. Per the last legislative session, as Peter was sort of summarizing, we started with 29.5 million. 2 million of that was set aside specifically for what are called mitigation, those like interim short-term strategies, and source investigation and the cost of consultant, but not remediation. That took another sort of act of the General Assembly in the last session. And the remaining funds, 16 million of that is carved out for Burlington for the costs associated with the removal and disposal of their PCB contaminated materials. So if you're running the math in your head, that leaves about 13 million available currently for all of the other costs for all schools. So, and also an additional piece of that is that the legislature, the original 2 million was an 80-20 cost share, and the legislature pivoted, and with the 13 million that is available for schools, the state is covering 100% of costs, and we're going back and covering the 20% costs from the original program. So the way that this works is very, very simple. The schools submit their costs, or the consultant does, DEC approves them, and then DEC sends out basically a not to exceed award letter. the school then will come into our grants management system and basically sort of apply for the funds, but I'm sort of checking to make sure DEC approved them, and then they can submit for reimbursement. So they can incur those costs and they'll carry those costs until they get reimbursement down the line. So that's the funding program. It's brief right now, and there's lots of questions to be asked about it, but those are the facts of the situation at this point. The second role that the agency plays is really there, frankly, to offer support, operational support, communication support, partnership between the agencies and the schools. I would say that our state partners have learned a ton, as Trish will probably attest, about how schools operate in the past couple of years. But this is what AOE does all the time. So I try as best I can to sometimes, translate between the schools. And I think I'm hearing what you're saying is this, and then, DEC or health can respond, and they've been very responsive to the needs of schools. And the one thing that I will say that I think is an important message for folks to hear in this group, because you are the school boards, and you have a really important role, I think, to play here. When this information sort of hits your schools, as Trish was saying, unfortunately, it is resource and time intensive, and our superintendents can attest to that when they share their experience. And I think that the critical role that school boards can play, especially having now heard about how long this process may take and how complex it is to provide that support to your school leadership and your district leadership, and understand that once you have a school level exceedance, that you're now in a regulatory framework, and that it's really, really critical to sort of follow the path. And that can be frustrating. I acknowledge it. I'm a problem solver by nature, and we want to get after it, and we want to get our school back to normal as soon as possible. But you are in a process, and you need to follow step by step, and that you'll hear me say that it's really critical to stay within that approval process with DEC, so that you do not make any costs ineligible by moving too quickly. So that's sort of my caution, but also my sort of, I'm going to call it a pep talk, that you have a really important role to play as school board members in this entire process, and keeping in that coordination with your administration and school leadership as they are working with the state agencies to get through it. And that's sort of another piece where AOE can sort of provide that support, is helping with that communication and operational support. And the final thing I will say, apologies, we are prepping for my 9-year-old's birthday tomorrow, so there's things happening over here. Last thing I'll say is that all of the state agencies are very much committed to ensuring that, and this has been, for me, as someone who worked throughout COVID, who works with our schools all the time on that education recovery piece, which we know is left undone right now, is that the operational disruptions, as much as possible, and it's not always possible, but are kept to a minimum. And our partners at DEC and the health department hear that message. And as much as possible, they're going to work with schools to say, like, okay, we hear you. If we take out, all of those spaces, you cannot, in fact, operate your school, because it turns out that's your entire administrative offices. What can we do, right? And so there is a back and forth, and there is a lot of listening and learning, I think, happening on both sides to ensure critically that kids are in school safely, and that they are learning normally as much as possible while keeping them safe. So that's the AOE role, and I'm always happy to answer questions. And and I'm sure that Lauren and Elaine can share their experience as well.
Yes, we're going to turn to Lauren and Elaine next. Does anyone have any questions for Jill at this point? Not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to move on. Oh,
and Sue, I will just also say, I'm the task force, the construction task force that Peter was referring to. He and I talk a lot about this. This is one of my other roles at the agency, is facilities and construction. So we certainly are we are all grappling with this, right? And so Peter and I will be talking a lot more in the days and weeks to come as we try to sort of find a path forward. But certainly it's on our mind at the agency very much.
Thank you very much, Jill. We'll turn now to our two superintendents who are here, and each of them are going to spend some time talking about their district's experience with PCBs. And let's hear from Elaine Collins first, and then we'll hear from Lauren Fearman after Elaine.
Thanks, Sue. I think I have the ability to share my screen. I did a very unsophisticated PowerPoint, but it'll sort of get some of the key points out. So nope, it's not going to let me do it. It's okay. I'll talk. And
oh, Carrie can share it if you're having trouble sharing.
I also have it, so I can share it if you'd like me to.
sure, that would.
Yes, I have made you a co-host, so it should work. But let me go ahead and share that for you, okay?
Thanks, Gary. All right. So here's PCBs in North Country Supervisory Union. As Sue said, I'm Elaine Collins. I'm the superintendent. This is my second year as superintendent, but my 34th year working in education and my 13th year as a school administrator. Next slide, please, Carrie. So even after consolidation and Act 46, North Country remained a supervisory union. So this is sort of our context. We have some very small pre-K to 8 schools and some very large pre-K to 6 elementary schools. We also have a career center, junior high, high school, and there's it's a large distance in our supervisory union. Next slide, please, Carrie. Go ahead. So 2,800 students, about 750 employees. There are 12 sites, free and reduced lunch, 56% or so. Our lowest elementary school, Lowell Elementary, has 82 students. Our highest elementary school, Derby Elementary, has about 500 kids. High school has about 750. I didn't put the demographics of 65 miles from one end of the SU to the other, about 520 square miles in between, and 15 school board meetings a month. So each of those districts are individual districts, so have individual governance structures. So most of the smaller schools don't have facilities managers, which means that this work really falls on the backs of principals to manage both the communication and the what are next steps. And we do have a facilities manager at the SU level that we added this July 1 for this fiscal year. And it was timely because that person has been helping with PCB mitigation and remediation efforts in several of our sites. Next slide, Carrie. So Trish did a good job of explaining kind of the ins and outs of what happens. So you have an elevated PCB level after you have your freak out moment. You can be prepared for a lot of initial communication with the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of Health, Agency of Education, but you're also going to be gathering together your school-based teams, your SU-based teams to support, like, what does this information mean and how do we message it and what do we do next so that it's not an interruption to education for our schools. Coming off from the heels of a public health emergency, the pandemic, and interrupted learning for teachers and students. This is really unfortunate timing. And when you have year after year after year of interrupted learning, it makes our jobs much more difficult. And this seems like another interruption. And that is in no way to say that these agencies are doing anything but their jobs. They've been very cooperative and really responsive and have been great to work with. But the situation isn't fun. And it is creating, I think, more stress on the system and certainly on principals and on facilities managers. Next slide, please, Carrie. So communication, as I said, those agencies have been fantastic. If we had had the level of support around COVID of people standing up front and taking all those questions, we would not have been taking the hit as administrators in school buildings. Really fantastic of standing up front, taking the heat of any questions and any concerns that people have, and just really kind of calming the crowd. That's been very, very helpful, helping with messaging, helping with principals who have questions, or if I have questions, facilities managers. The agency, I can't say enough good things about the agencies and how quick they've been to respond when we've had any concerns. Next slide. So as Trish said, you contract with your approved contractor. You know, the tricky part is you don't really know where the source is. So there's this unknown of how long is it going to take to find the source. You implement your short-term mitigation efforts. You decide on those, you implement those. You might increase airflow. You might put in some air filtration systems. You might open up the windows. Everything needs to be, as both Jill and Trish said, approved by all of the agencies first before you can proceed with your plan. But because of the quick timeline and responsiveness of the agencies, that's not time prohibitive, that part. Next slide. We have 3 current sites in North Country that have elevated levels. Newport City Elementary has about 320 students. North Country High School has about 750 students. Brighton Elementary has about 110 students. We have one other school that's been tested and has non-detectable results, Newport Town. We're awaiting actually 3 other sites, Derby, Troy, and Charleston. For some reason, Derby didn't make it onto my short list here. And we have others that haven't been tested yet. Next slide, Carrie. So Newport City has 2 ancillary spaces, a bathroom and a janitor's closet. And because they're not really in use with students, we have a year to decide to find the source and take some, do some remediation efforts, less of an imperative, less of a we've got to do it right now. And so we have until December of 2023 to complete that work. There's some plans to get that taken care of. Not super worried about Newport City. Next slide. So North Country High School does cause me some sleepless nights. They have about 100 rooms that are in the actionable level, and we've increased ventilations flow. We've put in charcoal activated air filtration systems. We've retested once. We're waiting for retesting to happen to see where those levels are. If we end up having to, if the levels, which has happened in some cases, a few, but in some cases go up, what do we do with a third of our school building that can't be used? So there is no Macy's in Northeast Kingdom, Vermont. So I'm not sure what we would do there. That does create some anxiety for me. But we'll cross that bridge if we come to it, I guess. And as you know, Representative Conlon was speaking about, this is a really old facility. There's 60 years old. We were talking about going out for bond and trying to even destroy this wing prior to PCBs being tested. So the agencies are working with us to try to figure out, okay, if we end up having to do some mitigation or remediation efforts, how do we fold that into some sort of a building plan? And that's still work that has to be crafted and thought about as time goes on. But we have now a ticking time clock, right? And so that adds some pressure to any sort of building plans or any sort of community effort to get a bond passed and try to do some building project. But that's North Country. Next slide, please. Brighton Elementary, pre-K to 8 building. Pre-K, as Trish said, we had to close down immediately. It was in May, so we closed down our pre-K for the remainder of last school year. We located to an alternative site for pre-K, and we're awaiting a modular classroom, getting the engineer hooked up to get the site ready, to get the modular ready to go. For the remainder of last school year, we needed to limit the amount of time that all K-6 students were in the building to 27 hours a week, which had some programming implications. Over the summer, we increased airflow, put in air filtration systems, and retested. The numbers went way down. We could have pre-K back in the building, but not in their original room. So rather than swap classrooms around, move the pre-K from where they already are, we just decided to stick with our original plan, which has been given the go-ahead. The other students also don't continue to have a time limit of being in the school. So that's decreased the amount of pressure on having to change up programming for those younger students. Next slide. Complicating factors, not having facilities managers in our smaller schools has stressed out principals. Having been our school principal for 11 years, it's a hard job. And then you throw in something like PCBs, which can be fairly time consuming, and that makes it even more stressful, right? And in the high school's case, there is a facilities manager, but he's short-staffed and has a regular job to do. And so when you throw in PCB management on top of that, it's an incredible amount of work. The lawsuit is also a complicating factor. Having Monsanto representatives on site while we're testing has been stressful. Lots of pictures and videos tend to make staff nervous. And the iterativeness of this process, the timeline of not knowing when it's going to end and how long this is going to drag out has been difficult for staff. And then the last slide, I think, Carrie. Worries, I'm a mother to 6 and grandmother to 12, so I worry a lot anyway, but add in that I worry about the disruption to learning and teaching, especially after several years of disrupted learning and teaching. I worry about folks who already have full plates being more stressed out. I worry about more schools in our SU having PCBs. We have 3 schools that we're waiting testing results for. And I worry that funding is going to run out at the state level and that the cost of this will fall back on taxpayers at the local level. So I think that's all I've got.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Collins. We're going to move now to Superintendent Fiernan for you to tell us what's happening in your area of the state.
All right, thank you, Sue. I'm Lauren Fierman. I'm the superintendent for the Two Rivers Supervisory Union, which is in southeastern Vermont. We are a relatively small supervisory union, just under 1,000 students. We have 2 school districts, one Ludlow Mount Holly that has 2 elementary schools, 2 pre-K through 6 schools in it, and the other Green Mountain Unified School District that has 2 elementary schools, both K-6, and also a middle high school, 7-12. At Ludlow Mount Holly, testing was completed at the end of last year and then the beginning of this one, and with no detectable results. We had 1 elementary school within the Green Mountain District that was tested again with no detectable results, and our high school was tested in April, and we had results in June showing elevated results in 23 rooms throughout the high school. If we had a full school, we would have been in a very hard to manage situation. The school, however, was built originally to accommodate roughly 750 students, and we have roughly 340 students within the school. So even before we were able to do some of the things that you've heard about in terms of putting in carbon filters to try to lower levels, we already knew that we were not going to have to go off-site in order to be able to run school. Some of the difficulties were the timing of it for us. The results came in June in a way that from the time it was reported to us, the 10-day for us to announce those results would have happened on the last day of school. We decided to announce our results almost immediately rather than waiting the 10 days because it felt really important to us to not be in a situation of saying to anybody that we had results, but we had waited a week to share them. So we, and fortunately, we had the support that Elaine and others have talked about. The Trish and Jill and others were immediately available, talked with us right from the day after we received the results, and helped us put together immediate communication. So between, I think we received the results on Thursday or Friday and had a letter sent out to our communities on Monday, and a panel discussion scheduled within our high school auditorium by Wednesday of the following week. We were fortunate on one hand, unfortunate on others to have all of this happen. But unlike some of the other schools where the large spaces are ones that they can't use, our auditorium, our cafeteria, and our gym were all between the school action level, but under the immediate action. So we were able to continue to use those spaces right away. Let's see. We did retesting as soon as over the summer because we were able to get approval for the carbon-based filters to come in. Those filters were placed in our school in July, and everybody moved heaven and earth to make sure that we got the results back quickly. And we in fact had the results back before school started that showed that we had reduced by roughly 70% those numbers, so that we are able to make use of, rather than having 23 rooms that were out of commission, we have a single room that we cannot use as we are going through the remediation process. Again, that is the good news of this really challenging situation. I would echo what Representative Conlon said, that it did not feel to any of us as though this was well thought out, that it was planned effectively, and that it feels still worrisome about it being an unfunded mandate. We are fortunate enough to have a supervisory union facilities director. That is a position that we put in place last year. And if we had not, I don't know how we would have managed. Todd Para, who is our facilities director, has done so much work in order to make this happen. He's also the building director for our high school. We do have new principals and new assistant principal in the high school. If you can imagine for a moment what that is like to have started your brand new principal and assistant principal job on July 1st, having just had the information go out to your community that your school has PCBs in it, all of these challenges. So there has been a great deal of stress. I would also echo what Elaine said while we were doing the retesting and putting the carbon-based filters in place. Having the Monsanto lawyers and people be in the building was very stressful. This is my 4th year as superintendent, my 6th year in Vermont. And as somebody who used to work as an attorney, I can speak to how stressful it is to have attorneys looking over your shoulder. So that has been a challenge for a lot of our staff. Elaine has pretty much covered everything that there is to say about this process. Specifically for us, what I would share with you is that we had remarkably small concern from our community that was directed to the school. Out on Facebook and with each other, there's a great deal of concern. But at our open forum, where all of the agency representatives were there, which was great, we had about 15 people who showed up. We recorded it. Lots more people watched it. I've been sending out update letters roughly every 2 weeks since the end of June. I get responses from a handful of people with concerns. We did meetings for our staff at the end of June and then again at the beginning, so that their questions are answered. There are worries from people about long-term concerns, but a lot of the fear at this point is about what the actual remediation is going to look like. So we have source testing happening right now, but it is and while we're thinking that we're identifying some of the places where where things are coming from, and along the lines of possibly in the caulking and possibly in the paint, we have a great deal of worry about, will there be a way to remediate without having to do very large scale changes to a building? And if it requires those large scale changes, and there is $13 million to serve every school that has currently been identified, that is not enough money to take care of all of the things that currently identified schools are going to need. So we are concerned about that, while the legislators and Jill are very helpful in telling us that there will be funds. It's hard to be certain about that. And I'm sure if you are beginning to deal with this in your communities, you'll have some concerns raised about that. Having said that, I do keep hearing from people that they are telling us that there will be support for it. And at a core level, I believe. So I think that we will be able to be successful with it. Beyond that, we are at this next stage of waiting to hear back from our consultant, who has also been wonderful about trying to do things as quickly as possible. So overall, the message from us is that there is nothing fun about this, but it is also a great deal of support and it is manageable. If we could rewind and say, perhaps you want to wait before starting this process to know exactly what it is you're getting yourself into, that's certainly what we would do. But here in reality, we are managing with what's in front of us reasonably well. And I think the support is excellent to make that happen.
Thank you to both superintendents for sharing your experiences with us. Now we're going to turn to Attorney General Charity Clark for the latest on what's happening in the PCB litigation that has been initiated by the state. And Attorney General Clark, thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure. I also want to introduce Assistant Attorney General and Chief of my Environmental and Public Protection Division, Justin Colber, who is here. Justin has worked in our environmental unit for over a decade, I think, and now he runs it in addition to our consumer unit and our civil rights unit. Let me just acknowledge that no one on this call did anything to deserve this, and we are all going through it in our own roles. It's very frustrating. I hear that from all of you. I feel the same way, but ultimately we're doing really good work for Vermonters, and we can be proud of the work that we're doing. I am very proud to have brought the lawsuit we brought against Monsanto, who, as Trish pointed out, was the creator, the manufacturer, and the seller of PCBs. And, I am the product of Vermont's schools. I went to Ludlow Elementary School, as did my parents and their parents. And I know firsthand that the schools are the hearts of our communities. And so, of course, I'm going to use my authority to do what I can to hold Monsanto accountable. So I just wanted to begin by saying those things. And then I kind of want to tell you an overview of where we are with the case. But in a nutshell, we're at the very beginning of the case. We sued on June 16th, I think. We filed a complaint. That's how you begin a lawsuit. You file a complaint. And we did that in state court. The next step normally in a lawsuit is the other side gets to file an answer to your complaint. Monsanto hasn't even yet filed an answer. They will at the end of next month. They have started the discovery process. The discovery process in a lawsuit is when both sides get to exchange information. So clearly they're involved, as Lauren was referencing there. But we really are at the very beginning. So we sued based on two basic claims. The first is under, for natural resources, for contamination of natural resources, and that includes, fish, sediments, waterways, and we have a fish advisory for Lake Champlain. Those in that area will know. And the second is on behalf of the schools and the contamination that our schools have experienced. That is based, of course, on the statewide testing that the legislature enacted. And now, the statistics that Trish described are very interesting and insightful to see that we certainly have a significant number of schools already we know have had contamination, and that allowed us to bring the lawsuit. But the important thing, vis-a-vis the school portion of the lawsuit, is that we'll be using our authority to seek monetary damages for the testing and remediation to try to address the problems. So those are the two main claims of the lawsuit. And I just want to flag that our website has an FAQ page that will answer hopefully a lot of the questions that you might have. We are really early on in the lawsuit. And so we don't have a whole lot to say at this point other than to provide that overview. And I want to reassure you how very serious this is to me, and what an honor really it is to represent the interests of the schools in this matter. And as Trish was describing the Cabot School and the pain in the ceiling, these are incredibly impactful to our communities. And I see that. I take it really seriously. I know Justin feels the same way. Justin and I talk about this case a lot, and it's really, really important to us. It's really a pleasure to be here this evening to hear the updates that I've heard, and also just to be able to speak to you. So I don't want to belabor the point. I know we're running over here, but I just did want to provide that overview. We'll have more resources, like I said, on our website, and I'm happy to answer questions if we can. And also, you can always feel free to reach out to our office. Justin is available. I'm available if you have questions or, want to talk anything through.
Thank you very much, Attorney General Clark. Does anyone have any questions for Attorney General Clark at this time? I'm not seeing any hands. Thank you very much. That was important information that you just provided. So at this
and
point,
Sue,
yes,
hi,
go ahead.
I am Justin. Good evening. I thought I would just put in the chat for everyone the website link that has our Q&A. If anyone wants to use that, or Sue, feel free to email that to anyone. You can read a copy of our complaint online as well, and that'll have more information that Charity covered. So, yeah.
That's
Thanks,
great.
Justin.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. At this time, I'd like to sort of wrap up our evening by turning back to Chair Conlon and asking, given all that we've heard tonight, which has certainly been a lot, what else do you think needs to be done at the legislative level, and how can school boards play a role in that?
Thanks. And it's been actually really helpful for me to hear from everybody. Like I said, I've tuned into a lot of all of the community forums that have taken place. And, I think that people are sort of getting information, but I can't help but think about a meeting that I was listening to, and, a parent saying, geez, my kids all have health problems. They're all adults now. They went to this school system. And in the back of their mind, they're wondering, wow, was it a result of the presence of PCBs? No one really knows the answer to that. People are left with a lot of questions. It's very challenging. And I think you've heard a lot of the challenges. And I think, the legislature, what we're going to have to be facing is, how are we going to pay for all of this? When North Country Union High School has 100 rooms that may need to be dealt with, and may need to be dealt with before their plan to perhaps tear the building down and start fresh, because it is a ticking time clock once you are identified as having a presence of PCBs. I just want to emphasize the levels of PCBs are Vermont invented levels. We are the lowest in the nation. So a lot of this stress and disruption is of our own making. And I think we need to understand that, be very upfront about that, and figure out how we're going to deal with it. We don't know how much this is going to cost, the remediation, the mitigation, the abatement. And we need information. And we need guidance from those who are strongly in favor of this program continuing. We need the administration to step up and say, in addition to we oppose any pause in this, we strongly support it going forward, we now need them to say, here's how we're going to pay for it. And this is coming from an administration that has constantly said, no new taxes, no new fees. Is this going to cost another $50 million, $100 million? How are we going to pay for that without new taxes and new fees? It's very easy to hide behind the education fund because the education fund is basically self-determined by votes in local school districts. The job of the legislature is to make sure there's enough money in it to fund it. So it's sort of a little bit of a bypass around directly saying, we've created this mandate, we're going to pay for this mandate, and here's how we're going to do it. So we are going to be looking in our committee to hear some straight answers to those questions. I mean, I'll be very frank. I'm not particularly proud of this program, and I'm not sure we're doing good work. This is highly disruptive and highly stressful on school districts. You know, I think about Bellows Falls, which can't use its auditorium, can't use its gymnasium right now. Brand new principal, brand new superintendent. You know, you come to a school to be an educational leader, and you're spending all of your time, you know, addressing lead one year and now PCBs. And, you know, this is the stuff that, frankly, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I perseverate on. And I just sort of wonder how we got here and how we're going to get out of it, while also trying to advance the needs that we know exist out there for sure, like our long-term facilities needs. And how are we going to help districts bring their schools up to 21st century learning centers that we can, you know, all sort of get behind and that everybody wants to go to. So I guess, you know, we don't have a plan going forward, but we're sure going to be asking for a lot of information and a lot of guidance from the administration.
Thank you very much, Chair Conlon, and to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate the time you took to be with us tonight and talk about this really serious matter. At this point, we do have a few minutes left for questions. If anyone has any questions for any of our panelists, please raise your hand and you'll be welcome to ask your question. I don't see. Oh, I thought I saw a hand, but I don't. Well, then we'll end our evening. And school board members, I'd like to thank all of you for attending this regional meeting this evening. As your membership organization, the VSBA is very appreciative of your service as a local school board member and your engagement with your association. You are the reason that we exist, and it's always a pleasure to be of service to you. And we hope that the information that you heard tonight is going to be helpful in your service as school board member. We're always trying to improve everything we do. So if you have feedback for us about tonight's meeting, please share that by way of an email to us. And we look forward to seeing each of you at your annual conference on October 26th and 27th. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening, and thanks for being here.